Usually when we talk about a missing person case, the absence is like the very first thing that draws attention.
Right. It's that immediate void.
Exactly. It's the empty chair at the dinner table or the backpack left by the front door. It's that sudden deafening silence where a vibrant life used to be. And that silence is supposed to be the trigger, right?
Yeah, because in a standard sociological framework, the silence itself becomes the alarm bell. I mean, it's the catalyst that mobilizes local communities, it triggers police protocols, and, it gets the media's attention. The absence creates this vacuum that society just rushes to fill with answers.
But then, you zoom out, you look at a bustling metropolis,
Yeah.
a city of millions upon millions of people, a place where sheer density creates a constant roar of activity.
Right, the ambient noise.
Exactly. And you start to realize that sometimes the silence of a missing child, or in the case we're looking at today, the silence of 100 missing children, it just doesn't ring any alarm bells at all.
No, it doesn't.
It just gets completely swallowed by the noise of the city.
Which, really forces us to look at a very clinical, very uncomfortable reality about urban infrastructure and social hierarchy. I mean, it asks us to define who we actually choose to see as a society and who we systemically allow to remain entirely invisible.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, we are so glad you're here joining us for this deep dive, because today we are looking into one of the most bizarre, horrifying, and frankly, sociologically revealing true crime cases in modern history.
It really is unprecedented.
It is. We are unpacking the story of a Pakistani serial killer named Javed Iqbal, who, in the winter of 1999, confessed to the murder of exactly 100 boys in the city of Lahore.
And to really pull this apart for you, we've synthesized a pretty wide array of sources. We are looking at localized true crime discussions, specifically deep dive forums where people in Pakistan are still dissecting the cultural memory and the raw terror of this hunt.
Because it's still so fresh for so many people.
Right, exactly. And we're cross-referencing that grassroots memory with archival reporting from publications like The Guardian, right from the time of the trial. Plus, we're rounding it out with historical Wikipedia records that cover both the factual timeline of the killer and, fascinatingly, a highly controversial biographical film about him.
Oh, the film.
Yeah, a film that was released and subsequently banned just recently in 2023.
So our mission today isn't just to walk you through a grim timeline of events. I mean, if you're joining us for this deep dive, you likely already have a nuanced interest in the darker, more complex corners of human psychology.
You want the why, not just the what.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What we really want to uncover with you is the psychological catalyst behind this unprecedented violence. We want to examine the truly historic and paradoxical legal response it provoked from the state. And ultimately, we want to look at what this entire saga reveals about the blind spots of a society when it comes to its most vulnerable populations.
It's a heavy one, for sure.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this, because the sheer scale of the anomaly here is staggering. How does a man murder 100 children in just 147 days, right in the middle of a major, densely populated city, without absolutely anyone noticing until he literally demands that they look at him?
Yeah, that is the defining paradox of this entire phenomenon. I mean, if you take nothing else away from the mechanics of this case, you have to understand this one thing.
What's that?
We are only having this conversation right now because the perpetrator decided we should.
Wow. Right.
The entire timeline of discovery is dictated by the killer's ego, not by law enforcement. The break in the case didn't come from some brilliant detective noticing a geographical pattern. It didn't come from a massive public outcry over missing street children. It came via the Postal Service.
Yeah, via the mail. Exactly.
Okay.
Let's start right there, at the end of the timeline, because it
Right.
perfectly sets the stage for the madness of what we're dealing with. So it's late 1999 in Lahore. Between May and December of that year, a span of just 147 days, the man carries out an industrialized murder spree. And then, on November 22nd, 1999, Javed Iqbal sits down, writes a letter, and mails it directly to the police.
Which is just so brazen.
It's unbelievable. And if you dig into the localized true crime forums where people still debate this case, there's a specific quote from this letter that is always brought up. It's chilling.
Yeah, I know the one we're talking about.
He writes, "My count ends at 100. My mission is now complete. My message will reach the entire world. I will make many mothers cry. I will send their sons to the next world without a coffin, through the sewers."
It's so dark. And when you analyze the text of that letter, it reads like a grand manifesto. But what's truly disturbing is how highly bureaucratic it is.
Bureaucratic, how so?
Well, along with this dark proclamation, he isn't just haunting them, He includes a meticulous ledger. He provides the names of his victims, detailed information on the exact locations where he picked them up, his specific methodology for murder.
Like an invoice or something.
Exactly like an invoice. And the gruesome chemical logistics of how long it took hydrochloric acid to break down human remains. And, to top it all off, he actually includes the address to his own home.
Right.
16B Ravi Road.
Right. He literally hands them the entire case wrapped in a bow on a silver platter. So the police, specifically the deputy superintendent on duty at the time, they actually follow up. They drive to this address, 16B Ravi Road.
Okay.
Javed Iqbal, who's 38 years old at this point, he opens his front door, and according to the historical record, the second he sees the police, he completely loses that dark bravado of his letter. He panics.
That drops the act.
Completely.
Yeah.
He pulls a gun, points it at his own head, and threatens to pull the trigger if the police don't step back and leave his property.
Yeah.
And the police leave.
They just leave.
They literally just walk away from the house. They assume the letter is a prank, just the ravings of a madman. They look at this guy standing in his doorway and they think, there's no way this visibly terrified man just killed 100 boys.
Which is, from an investigative standpoint, a catastrophic failure of basic protocol.
To put it mildly, yeah.
But psychologically, it's fascinating. It highlights a massive systemic underestimation of what evil actually looks like in the real world. I mean, the police had a written confession,
Right.
a physical address,
Yeah.
a suspect threatening suicide with a firearm,
Yeah.
and they walked away without ever crossing the threshold to inspect the premises. Why? Because they walked up to that house expecting to see a monster like something out of a movie, someone visibly deranged or physically imposing.
And instead, they saw a panicked, sweating, 38-year-old man having a breakdown.
Exactly. Because he didn't fit their internal schema of a criminal mastermind, they just dismissed the physical evidence right in front of them.
You know, I was reading about this interaction, and it strikes me that because the police ignored him, it actually offended him.
No, definitely. A huge blow to his ego.
Right. Iqbal escalates the situation because he desperately wants his audience. So on December 1st, 1999, which is just over a week after the police walked away, he sends another letter. But this time, he bypasses law enforcement entirely.
He goes to the media.
Yes. He sends it to the chief crime reporter of the Daily Young newspaper, a man named Kawar Naim Hashmi. And he doesn't just send a letter. He sends a 32-page handwritten diary.
Wow.
This document is his masterwork. It's a complete, exhaustive confession. He includes physical photographs of the victims and demands that the newspaper publish it to tell the world exactly what he accomplished.
What's fascinating here is the psychological profile of a killer who actively prioritizes public validation over basic self-preservation. I mean, traditional law enforcement failed to give him the recognition, the infamy that he felt he had earned.
So he pivots.
Right. So what does he do? He goes to the press to control his own narrative. He essentially becomes his own public relations manager. He wants to be the sole author of his own historical record.
It's like an arsonist calling the fire department not to put out the fire, but to complain that the news helicopters haven't arrived to admire the flames yet.
That is a perfect analogy.
He is ensuring his work is cataloged. So this journalist, Hashmi, receives this package and immediately goes to 16B Ravi Road. The police aren't there, obviously. Hashmi finds a padlock on the front door.
Okay.
So he climbs up, jumps the exterior wall of the compound, and walks into what can only be described as a logistical nightmare. The archival sources detail exactly what he found in that house. First, he finds 85 pairs of children's shoes neatly arranged.
Just horrifying.
Then he finds a massive sack overflowing with unwashed children's clothes. And then in the next room, he finds 4 massive blue industrial barrels. And radiating from these barrels is the suffocating, burning stench of hydrochloric acid.
Oh, man.
Inside those barrels were the partially dissolved remains of the victims.
I think we really need to pause and look at the physical mechanics of that scene because it tells us so much about his mindset. He didn't just leave a chaotic mess behind as he fled. He curated a museum.
A museum. That's a chilling way to put it, but it's accurate.
The sources mention he left a very specific message written in marker on the wall for the journalist or the police to find. The message stated that he had deliberately stopped the chemical dissolution process.
Wait, on purpose?
Yes, on purpose. He specifically preserved some of the bodies so the authorities could actually identify them before he went to the Ravi River to commit suicide. Do you see the level of control here? He is stage managing the post-crime discovery.
I want to talk about those 4 blue barrels for a second, because the logistics are deeply unsettling. Acquiring industrial quantities of hydrochloric acid isn't like buying milk. You don't just pick it up at the corner store.
No, absolutely not.
He had to transport heavy, sloshing barrels of highly corrosive chemicals into a residential neighborhood. And hydrochloric acid doesn't dissolve human tissue in 10 minutes like in the movies.
Right, it takes days.
It takes days. It requires a constant process of breaking down proteins and fats.
Yeah.
The smell in that house would have been a physical wall of rot and chemical burning. And he lived inside that smell. He slept in that house.
It speaks to an absolute detachment from humanity. I mean, he had turned his living space into an abattoir, an industrial processing plant for human beings. And the fact that he left the shoes, shoes are often the most durable item of clothing, the hardest thing to destroy, but they're also the most personal identifier for a parent.
Which is exactly what happens next. The journalist, Hashmi, publishes the story. It hits the front page, listing the names of 57 children that Iqbal had provided. And the very next day, 16B Rabi Road is surrounded by a massive, hysterical crowd.
I can't even imagine the scene.
It's weeping, shattered parents who have descended on the house, and they are recognizing their kids' shoes and clothes scattered right there in the courtyard. It is a scene of pure, concentrated grief. And immediately it launches the biggest, most aggressive manhunt in Pakistani history.
Well, the police are humiliated at this point.
Completely humiliated. The public is out for blood, and every resource is deployed to find Javed Iqbal.
But the irony is, the police don't catch him. With all the resources of the state looking for him, he outmaneuvers them again.
Yeah.
Exactly. On December 29th or 30th, a full month after his very first letter to the police, Javed Iqbal literally walks into the front doors of the Daily Jung newspaper office.
He just walks right in.
He bypasses security, walks up to the journalists, and surrenders to them. He stands there and says, "I am Javed Iqbal, killer of 100 children. I hate this world. I have no regret on what I did. I am ready to die."
It's so theatrical.
And when one of the stunned reporters asks him why he stopped at 100, why he didn't kill more, Iqbal casually mentions that he had the financial resources to kill 500 if he wanted to. But he explains that he came to the newspaper to surrender because he was terrified the police would just execute him in the street if they found him first.
See, this is an incredibly calculating individual. He knows exactly how the system works.
Yeah.
He uses the media as a physical shield against the police, whom he clearly distrusts and despises, while simultaneously using that exact same media apparatus as a megaphone for his ego. He guarantees his physical safety by surrendering in front of cameras, ensuring the police have to take him in alive. Which brings up a really crucial question for you and me to look at right now. Why go to the press at all?
Right.
Was this a manifestation of overwhelming guilt? Was the burden of 100 lives too much to bear? Or was it pure, unadulterated ego? Because to understand the mind that demanded front-page coverage for mass murder, we have to rewind the tape.
We have to look at the origins.
We need to look at who Javed Iqbal was before 1999. Because the standard profile of a disorganized, disenfranchised, crazed killer completely falls apart here. We are looking at a man who was wealthy, who was educated. How does someone with those advantages become the most prolific predator of street children in a nation's history?
To unpack that, we have to look closely at the intersection of developmental psychology and socioeconomic privilege. According to the biographical data and the archival reporting, Iqbal was born in 1961 into a deeply wealthy family in Lahore.
So he wasn't desperate.
Not at all. His father was a highly successful businessman. Iqbal was the sixth of 8 children, and the sources describe him as a highly intelligent child, but one who developed deep-seated, simmering aggression very early on in his life. And this aggression largely stemmed from constant, intense comparison and competition with his siblings for his father's approval.
And he didn't just act out. He manifested this aggression in incredibly bizarre, controlling ways. I was reading through the localized discussions on Reddit, and there's a detail from his own brother that really paints a picture.
Oh, the nighttime thing.
Yes. His brother recounted how Iqbal would routinely wake the entire family up in the middle of the night, parents, siblings, everyone, and force them to stand in a perfectly straight line in the house for absolutely no reason other than because he demanded it.
It's pure dominance.
Exactly. And if his father denied him something or pushed back against his demands, Iqbal would resort to extreme self-harm right in front of them to manipulate the situation. He was a master of using extreme, unpredictable behavior to assert dominance over his environment.
And, what you're describing is a highly manipulative individual who learned at a critical developmental stage that he could bend the adults around him to his will through extreme reactions. He learned that his anger was a currency that bought compliance.
And his dad just enabled it.
Yeah. His father, perhaps trying to channel this chaotic energy into something productive, actually empowered him further. After Iqbal attended government Islamia College, his father bought him a villa in the affluent Altar area of Lahore and entirely bankrolled a steel recasting business for him in 1978.
Wow.
Iqbal was still just a student, barely an adult, but he was suddenly given complete, unchecked authority over a functioning industrial enterprise and a workforce.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and by interesting, I mean deeply systematically sinister.
Yeah.
Iqbal didn't just use this steel business to make money. He essentially weaponized the infrastructure of capitalism.
He built a trap.
Yes. He specifically started hiring young boys, aged 6 to 16, to work in his recasting plant. Now, we have to acknowledge the socioeconomic reality of the time. Child labor was, and unfortunately remains, a reality in many struggling economies, including Pakistan's during the late 70s and 80s.
Primarily because it's a source of incredibly cheap labor.
Right. But saving money on wages wasn't Iqbal's primary motivation. He was using the promise of a daily wage as a literal lure.
Precisely. He was using economic leverage to build a pipeline, gaining unfettered, unquestioned access to a highly vulnerable demographic. The historical sources are unequivocally clear that Iqbal was a pedophile, and he was using his legitimate businesses to construct a private hunting ground.
It's disgusting.
It really is. And he didn't stop with the steel business. He realized he needed different lures. So he later opened an arcade video game shop. He opened a local gym. He opened an aquarium. Think about the demographic those specific businesses are designed to attract.
Right, they are literally magnets for young boys and teenagers. It's horrifyingly calculated. It's vertical integration for abuse. The true crime discussions detail his specific manipulation tactics, particularly at the arcade. Imagine you are a 10-year-old kid in Lahore. You go to this arcade to play games. Iqbal would purposefully drop money coins or small bills on the floor near a child.
The setup.
Yeah, the setup. When the child inevitably noticed the money and picked it up, Iqbal would swoop in and falsely accuse them of stealing from the till. He would manufacture this intense guilt and fear of police involvement to isolate the child.
He makes them the villain in their own mind.
Exactly. He would tell them they were in trouble, take them into a private back room to sort it out, and then assault them. He engineered scenarios where the victims inherently felt they were in the wrong, making them terrified to ever report the abuse to their parents or the authorities.
It is classic textbook predatory grooming, but it's amplified by immense financial power and social standing. We also have to consider the strict societal context he was operating within.
Right, the legal environment at the time.
Yes. He was a homosexual man in a conservative, Muslim-majority country operating under systems influenced by Sharia law. Specifically, during the late 70s and 80s in Pakistan, the Hudud ordinances were in effect.
And those were very strict, right?
Very strict. They criminalized extramarital sex and homosexuality with severe punitive measures. So to maintain his cover, to protect his wealth and his societal standing, Iqbal entered into 2 separate arranged marriages with women.
Just as a shield.
Exactly. Both of those marriages failed very quickly, but they served their vital purpose. They provided a temporary facade of normalcy. They deflected suspicion.
But facades are expensive to maintain, and eventually his wealth simply runs out. In 1997, Iqbal faces a massive, catastrophic financial crisis. He loses the steel business, he has to sell off the arcade, the gym, his properties, and eventually he's forced to sell his luxury villa.
A total collapse of his empire.
He is reduced to moving into a cramped rental house in the middle of Lahore City, that infamous address, 16B Ravi Road. And this geographic and financial shift forces him to change his hunting strategy entirely.
Because he loses his leverage.
Exactly. He no longer has the lure of the arcade tokens or the gym equipment. He doesn't have employees. So he has to go to where the most desperate children already are.
He adapts his methodology. He shifts his geographic focus to Data Darbar. Now, for context, Data Darbar is the largest Sufi shrine in South Asia. It is the resting place of the venerated Saint Ali Hujwiri. It is a massive, sprawling complex that sees hundreds of thousands of visitors.
It's huge.
It is. And places of worship of this magnitude, particularly shrines that distribute free food or langar, inherently become congregating points for the disenfranchised. They become magnets for the unhoused, for runaways, for orphans looking for a safe place to sleep or a guaranteed meal.
Think about that ecosystem. You have runaway kids who have fled violently abusive homes. You have kids who have traveled from rural, drought-stricken villages to the big city, hoping to earn a few pennies to send back to their starving families.
Just incredibly vulnerable children.
They arrive at this massive marble shrine, completely overwhelmed, and there is Javed Iqbal. He targets the truly invisible children. He offers them a hot meal, a few rupees, a safe place to sleep at his house on Ravi Road.
And this makes me wonder, does his previous wealth and status, or at least the lingering aura of it, the fact that he was an articulate older man, does that explain why the community and the police ignored the warning signs for so long?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this entire case acts as a brutal, unflinching indictment of extreme social inequality and class divides.
Yeah.
Predators, whether they are financial fraudsters or serial killers, excel at identifying the path of least resistance. Iqbal capitalized on these marginalized children because he knew with absolute certainty that society had already forgotten them.
Which is just heartbreaking to think about.
It is. I mean, if a wealthy child from the Altar area goes missing, there is an immediate police task force. The media is mobilized.
Yep.
But if an impoverished runaway boy goes missing from the courtyard of a crowded shrine, there is no alert. There is no task force.
No one even notices. Exactly. Iqbal's earlier wealth certainly insulated him from scrutiny, allowing him to build his predatory infrastructure. But even after he lost every penny, his ability to operate freely for years was sustained entirely by the sheer, crushing apathy of the society around him regarding these specific impoverished children.
So, we have established that he was a predator for years, abusing children with relative impunity, using wealth, and then utilizing sheer desperation. But what escalated him?
Right, the turning point.
What is the trigger that turns a chronic, systematic abuser into a man who decides to systematically murder exactly 100 boys, dissolve their bodies in industrial acid, and meticulously log the entire process over the course of 147 days? Because serial killers usually escalate gradually.
They don't usually jump straight to 100 in 5 months.
No. Iqbal detonated. There is a very specific catalyst for this explosion of violence.
The turning point, the true catalyst for the 1999 murders, occurs a few years earlier in the 1990s. The historical sources detail an incident where Iqbal utilized his standard methodology. He found an 18-year-old boy at dead Darbar, gained his trust, and brought him back to his house.
Okay.
He proceeded to assault the young man. But this time, the script flipped. The victim fought back.
Wow. Good for him.
Yeah. While Iqbal was sleeping after the assault, the young man found Iqbal's own rifle in the house. He didn't just try to escape it. He took that rifle and bludgeoned Iqbal in the head with it. The attack was so severe, so violent, that neighbors heard the screaming and the commotion and immediately called the police.
And this is where the legal system finally gets involved with Javed Iqbal, but absolutely not in the way you would expect.
Not at all.
When the police arrive, the 18-year-old boy isn't charged with assault or attempted murder. He tells the police what Iqbal did to him. Consequently, Iqbal is arrested and charged with attempted sodomy and assault. And under the Islamic penal code applied at the time, the court hands down a severe sentence. He is sentenced to 100 lashes in public.
100 lashes.
Yes. Furthermore, because of the massive head trauma from being beaten with a rifle, Iqbal actually falls into a coma for 22 days.
We really have to analyze what this means for a person with his specific psychological makeup. This event is a profound, catastrophic moment of rupture. While he is unconscious in this coma and during the subsequent fallout from his criminal conviction and his impending public flogging, his wealthy family makes a definitive decision.
He cut him off.
Completely. They completely abandon him. In South Asian culture, there is a very powerful concept of izzat, which translates roughly to honor, prestige, or face.
Izzat.
Iqbal's highly public arrest for a crime that carries immense social and religious stigma completely destroyed the family's izzat. To protect themselves, they severed all ties. They refused to pay his mounting medical bills. They refused to visit him.
Wow, they just left him there.
The only person who stood by him was his mother. She paid his hospital bills, she wept by his bed, but the immense stress, the public shame, and the agony of watching her son's total social and economic collapse ultimately broke her. She suffered a fatal heart attack shortly after.
Wow. And this is where the gears in Iqbal's twisted mind lock into place.
This is the moment.
He doesn't look in the mirror and say, my actions caused this. He draws a direct, causal, and entirely delusional line from the police arresting him to the sentence of 100 lashes, straight to his mother's death.
He blames the state.
He writes about this explicitly in his 32-page diary, and this is the quote that sends absolute chills down my spine. He writes, "They beat me so much that my head was crushed. I did it all for revenge. I will make 100 mothers cry, just like my mother cried for me.
From a clinical psychological standpoint, what we are looking at is a textbook, extreme case of a narcissistic injury.
A narcissistic injury.
Yeah. Consider his entire life up to this point. This is a man who spent his formative years dominating his family, who spent his adulthood economically dominating his employees, and who spent his nights dominating vulnerable children. He viewed himself as untouchable.
Like a king in his own little world.
Exactly. Suddenly, he is physically bested and beaten near death by one of his own victims. He is arrested, publicly humiliated, and physically punished by the state apparatus. He is entirely disowned by his family, experiencing social death. His grand self-image as a powerful, controlling figure is completely shattered into a million pieces.
So his reality just breaks.
Right. A narcissist of this magnitude simply cannot internalize that level of shame and guilt. They lack the emotional machinery to process it, so they must externalize it. They must project the immense boiling rage outward onto the world.
It becomes this horrifying, twisted mathematical equation of grief and vengeance in his mind. 100 lashes equals 100 murders.
A math of a madman.
Yeah. He couldn't punish the police who arrested him, he couldn't get his hands on the judge who sentenced him, and he couldn't find the 18-year-old who got away. So he decided to punish the most helpless, invisible proxies he could find.
It's just devastating.
And his methodology for these 100 murders reflects this incredibly cold, vengeful calculus. He wasn't acting in a blind frenzy. He wasn't losing control. He was executing a plan.
A very specific plan.
He would go to Data Darbar. He would find a boy, treat him to a nice dinner to gain his total trust, bring him back to Robbie Road, and then he would strangle them. He used a specific heavy metal chain to do it.
The same chain every time?
Yeah. After they were dead, he would pose them, take a physical photograph of them alongside their assigned number between 1 and 100, and then he would methodically hoist their bodies into those blue barrels of hydrochloric acid.
I want to focus on that meticulousness for a moment, because the numbering of the victims, the photography, the chemical disposal, none of that is strictly necessary to commit murder.
No, not at all. You could just bury them.
Right. It is all about the restoration of control. The state took away his power, stripped him of his dignity, and reduced him to nothing. So he responded by playing God with 100 human lives, systematically reducing them to literal chemical nothingness in vats of acid, all while creating a paper trail that documented his absolute omnipotent power over them.
He claims in his diary that he did this solely because of police injustice. I have to ask you, is he genuinely trying to frame himself as a victim, like some sort of martyr of a corrupt system? Or did the state violence, those 100 lashes, actually unlock a door and unleash a much worse monster that was already waiting in the dark?
It's a very complex interplay of factors, but we have to be clear. The predisposition for violence or predation was already fully formed. I mean, he had been abusing and trapping children for years. The state punishment, the flogging, did not magically create the monster.
It just gave the monster an excuse.
Precisely. It provided the specific narrative justification, the target, and the exact numeric framework for his massive escalation. He utilized his perceived victimization to rationalize a rampage of unimaginable cruelty. In his profoundly distorted reality, he believed his pain, and his mother's pain, was the only pain that truly mattered in the universe.
So messed up.
Making 100 other mothers feel his mother's pain was, to his mind, a twisted form of cosmic balancing. He became a vigilante, enforcing his own grotesque version of justice.
So the motive is declared to the world, the killer is in custody after surrendering to the newspaper, and now the Pakistani legal system has to figure out how to process a crime of a scale and a horror they have literally never encountered before. We enter the trial phase, and it immediately devolves into an absolute spectacle.
A total circus.
Iqbal's behavior in the courtroom is completely erratic, almost mocking the proceedings.
He treats the courtroom like a theater production, where he is simultaneously the lead actor, the director, and the playwright.
Yeah, he just won't stop playing games.
He refuses to stick to a narrative. First, he stands by his 32-page confession. Then, a few days later, he abruptly changes his story, claiming to the judge that 20 other random people actually broke into his house, murdered the children, and framed him.
20 random people?
Yeah, just completely made up. Then he pivots again, withdrawing the confession entirely. He looks the court in the eye and tells them that all 100 boys are actually still alive, living safely in other cities, and that the entire 32-page diary, the barrels of acid, the letters to the press, it was all just an incredibly elaborate publicity stunt he masterminded to force the government to finally pay attention to the plight of street children.
Which is an incredibly manipulative, cynical defense strategy.
It is.
He's actively trying to rebrand himself in the media from a mass murderer to some sort of radical, misunderstood social activist.
Yeah.
And legally speaking, he is trying to exploit a very specific, glaring weakness in the prosecution's case.
So forensics.
Exactly. Despite the horrific smell, the blue barrels of acid, and the fragmented bones found at Robbie Road, the archival articles note that the prosecution struggled with conclusive forensic evidence. Remember, this is 1999 in Pakistan. DNA testing is not what it is today.
And the acid, it destroys genetic material.
Right. The hydrochloric acid had done its job too well. It was incredibly difficult to explicitly link him forensically to the specific identities of the bodies found.
He was keenly aware of the limitations of forensics at the time. He was relying on the chaos of the trial and the lack of definitive DNA matching to create reasonable doubt. But he underestimated the sheer weight of the circumstantial evidence.
It was a mountain of it.
Yeah, the diaries in his handwriting, the photographs he took, the 85 pairs of shoes, and crucially, the testimonies of his own accomplices. It was overwhelming proof.
Right. We absolutely cannot forget the accomplices, because he didn't live in that house alone. There were teenage boys who lived with him in that house of horrors at Ravi Road.
The accomplices are such a tragic element of this.
There was Sajid, who was 16 years old, Nadeem, who was also 16, and Sabir, who was only 13 years old. These boys were essentially captive victims themselves, runaways who were groomed, abused, and eventually coerced or forced into participating in the logistics of the murders, helping dispose of bodies or luring other kids.
Just kids themselves?
Yeah. When the verdicts came down, the court handed down staggering, almost incomprehensible sentences for these teenagers. Nadeem was sentenced to 186 years in prison. Sabir, the 13-year-old child who grew up in a house with dissolving bodies, was given 42 years. And Sajid received a mind-boggling sentence of 686 years.
686 years. It's symbolic, really.
And there was actually a fourth teenage accomplice who didn't even make it to the trial. He died in police custody very early on in the investigation. The official police report claimed he voluntarily jumped from a window during interrogation, but leaked autopsy reports strongly suggested that severe, lethal force had been used against him.
The presence of those accomplices, the horrific sentences handed down to minors, and the swift, brutal end of one of them while in police custody really highlights the volatile and highly charged atmosphere surrounding this trial.
The public was furious.
The public outrage in Lahore was at an absolute boiling point. Every single day, there were massive, furious protests outside the courthouse. The parents of the missing children were gathered, demanding blood. The pressure on the judiciary to deliver not just a guilty verdict, but a decisive, retributive outcome that would quell the public fury was immense.
And that immense pressure leads directly to one of the most historic, unprecedented, and controversial sentences ever handed down in modern legal history.
It really shocked the world.
On February 4th, 2001, Judge Alabash delivers his final ruling. And he doesn't just hand down a death penalty. He leans heavily into the principles of Islamic Sharia law, specifically the concept of qisas,
Which translates to equal retaliation.
an eye for an eye. The Guardian article provides the exact chilling quote from the judge's decree. He rules that Javed Iqbal is to be taken to Manhunt, Pakistan, which is a massive, highly symbolic national monument in Lahore.
A very public place.
Extremely public. There, in broad daylight, in front of the parents of his victims, he's to be strangled exactly 100 times with the exact same metal chain he used to kill the boys. Following that, his body is to be physically cut into 100 pieces and dissolved in a vat of acid.
Wow. This ruling forces us to confront an incredibly difficult, important question about the fundamental nature of justice versus vengeance.
It does, because it sounds more like revenge than a legal sentence.
Exactly. The judge's sentence was designed to be perfectly symmetrical to the crime. It was a literal mathematical manifestation of an eye for an eye, scaled up to 100. But by issuing this decree, the judge immediately sparked a massive domestic and international constitutional crisis.
Because almost immediately, the executive branch of the government steps in. The Interior Minister of Pakistan at the time, Wanuddin Haider, holds a press conference and publicly opposes the judge's ruling.
They had to step in.
He points out a glaring legal reality. Pakistan is a signatory of the International Human Rights Commission. He states that the state simply cannot legally carry out public, medieval-style executions or bodily mutilations, regardless of the severity of the crime or the public demand for it.
And you can see both sides of the tension here. The judge's sentence was essentially born out of profound public grief and outrage. It was a theatrical attempt to provide catharsis to a deeply traumatized society. The judge wanted the punishment to fit the crime perfectly.
Right, but the state's executive branch recognized the immense philosophical and legal danger of that path. If the state officially sanctions slicing a man into 100 pieces and boiling him in acid in a public park, it sacrifices its own moral authority.
It violates international treaties and reduces the government to the level of the cartel or the serial killer.
So what does this all mean for the concept of law itself? If the state actually follows through and dissolves him in acid, aren't they just validating Iqbal's own twisted vengeance-based logic that started this whole tragedy?
Exactly.
Remember his equation. He believed his 100 lashes justified 100 murders. He believed pain required equal pain. If the state then tortures him to death using his own methods, they're playing exactly by his rules. They're saying his math was right all along.
Precisely. It entirely blurs the line between a justice system and state-sponsored vengeance. The foundational premise of a modern legal system is that it is supposed to elevate society above the brutality of the criminal.
It's supposed to be better than them.
Right. It is supposed to be objective, not mimic the violence it seeks to punish. But the sheer, unprecedented horror of Iqbal's crimes pushed the local judiciary to the absolute edge of that philosophical boundary.
So we have this historic, incredibly controversial sentence hanging in the air. The appeals are being frantically filed by defense lawyers. International human rights organizations are watching Lahore like a hawk. We are completely set up for a constitutional showdown about the soul of Pakistan's justice system.
But it doesn't happen.
The execution never happens. The sentence is never carried out. Because right before the appeals can be heard, we enter into a literal locked room mystery.
Yes, the narrative takes an abrupt, highly suspicious, and very final turn.
It's the morning of October 9th, 2001. Javed Iqbal and his main accomplice, 16-year-old Sajid, are currently being held in separate, isolated cells in Block 7 of the maximum security Lakpat jail in Lahore. And on that morning, guards discover that both of them are dead in their respective cells.
Dead.
The official ruling from the prison authorities is released almost immediately. It's declared a suicide by hanging. The prison claims that both men managed to use their own thin bed sheets to end their lives simultaneously.
However, when you impartially weigh the logistical facts of that night, the anomalies surrounding their deaths are glaring. And they immediately cast a massive shadow of doubt on the official narrative provided by the prison.
The timing alone is insane.
Right. First, consider the environment. This is a maximum security block housing the most infamous prisoner in the country. Yet there is a total, unexplained failure of the surveillance system.
Of course there is.
The CCTV cameras specifically monitoring Block 7 inexplicably stopped working between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. on the exact night they died.
That is a highly, highly convenient blackout.
Very convenient. Furthermore, the specific prison guard, whose explicit duty it was to walk the block, make rounds, and physically monitor those high-profile cells, was reportedly asleep at his post during that exact 4-hour window of time.
So I'm supposed to believe that the cameras magically die, the guard falls asleep, and the two most high-profile, heavily monitored prisoners in the country decide to simultaneously coordinate and execute a hanging in separate locked cells.
It completely strains credulity.
It does. And the physical evidence makes the official story even harder to swallow. Because both the Wikipedia summary and the deep dive true crime sources note that when the autopsies were finally performed on Iqbal and Sajid, the medical examiners found undeniable evidence that both men had been subjected to severe, blunt force beatings prior to their deaths.
When we look at this objectively, we are left with two primary hypotheses for what happened in Lakpat jail that night. The first is the official narrative, suicide. And psychologically, it is entirely plausible.
How so?
This is Javed Iqbal, a man deeply afraid of physical pain. Remember, he surrendered to a newspaper specifically to avoid being shot by the police. He was staring down the very real prospect of being strangled 100 times and slowly lowered into acid. Faced with the impending reality of that agonizing death, he may have chosen to take his own life on his own terms.
Just to avoid the pain.
Right, and perhaps he coerced or convinced his young, deeply traumatized accomplice to do the same.
Okay, I can buy that he wanted to avoid the acid. I mean, who wouldn't? But What about the physical beatings noted in the autopsy? What about the cameras turning off?
And that leads directly to the second highly supported hypothesis, extrajudicial killing.
They murdered him.
We have to remember the immense burning embarrassment Iqbal caused the Lahore police force and the government. He evaded a massive manhunt. He publicly mocked their incompetence. He blamed his entire murder spree on their brutality during his prior arrest, and he completely exposed their failure to protect 100 vulnerable children under their watch.
The police looked terrible.
There was a tremendous amount of institutional animosity directed toward him. It is highly possible, many would argue probable, that elements within the police or the prison system decided to take matters into their own hands.
You clean up the mess.
Yes. They may have wanted to enact their own revenge, or perhaps high-ranking officials wanted to circumvent the messy, embarrassing international appeals process over his controversial sentence. By killing him, they silenced him permanently.
It feels like watching a movie where the studio executives step in and demand a neat, abrupt ending. Because the real story is getting too complicated, too political, and too messy for them to handle.
A systemic tying up of loose ends.
Exactly. But here's the tragedy of that locked room. Does this convenient death deny the victims' families actual closure? They were promised a public reckoning in the courts. They were promised a symmetrical punishment by a judge. Instead, they got a quiet, unverified death in the dark.
And no real answers.
In the end, Iqbal's body was never even claimed by a surviving family. His izzat was so utterly destroyed that no one came for him. He was buried anonymously by the state. The narcissist who wanted the whole world to know his name, who killed 100 boys just to ensure his legacy, died in the dark and was discarded like trash.
The lack of a transparent judicial conclusion certainly robbed the families and society at large of a definitive resolution. The suddenness of his death prevented a full, open legal examination of the case. And more importantly, it allowed the underlying systemic societal issues to be quietly swept back out of the public eye.
Issues like the extreme vulnerability of street children.
Yes, the incompetence of law enforcement, the massive class disparities, they were all just swept under the rug, at least temporarily.
But the trauma he inflicted on the city of Lahore and the massive, uncomfortable questions he raised about that society, those things refuse to just disappear. You can't just bury 100 missing kids and pretend it didn't happen.
No, the culture remembers.
The memory of Javed Iqbal lingered in the cultural consciousness for decades, eventually bleeding into pop culture in a way that proves exactly how raw this nerve still is. Over 20 years later, in 2023, the Pakistani film industry produced a biographical crime film about the case.
Right, the movie.
It was originally titled Javed Iqbal, The Untold Story of a Serial Killer. It was directed by Abu Aleha, and it starred well-known actors Yasir Hussain playing Akmal and Ayesha Omar playing a fiction-wise police officer trying to catch him. The film eventually becomes known simply as Kukri.
And Kukri was a nickname long associated with Iqbal in the press, though its exact origins in relation to him are somewhat debated. It often refers to a type of heavy, curved knife, perhaps symbolizing his predatory nature or his early criminal associations. But the creation of this film is highly significant.
Why is that?
It represents a society attempting to process its own deep historical trauma through the lens of art and cinema. They're trying to look at the monster.
But the state, it turns out, was absolutely not ready for that kind of public processing. The film is fully produced, heavily marketed, and scheduled to be released in cinemas nationwide in January 2022. Literally one day before the massive premiere, the Punjab government and the Central Board of Film Censors step in and completely ban the movie.
Just pulled the plug.
They pull it from every theater. And the historical sources specify the exact reason for the ban. It wasn't banned because of the violence. It wasn't banned because the murders were too gory to show. It was banned explicitly due to its portrayal of the government and the police force.
This is a textbook, modern example of a state apparatus attempting to censor its own history. The censorship authorities weren't necessarily trying to protect the delicate sensibilities of the public from the grim reality of a serial killer. They were protecting themselves from the uncomfortable mirror the film held up.
They didn't want to look bad.
Exactly. The story of Javed Iqbal is inextricably, permanently linked to the authorities' initial incompetence. It highlights their failure to heed the warning signs when he was running his businesses, their failure to catch him when he mailed them his address, and their total inability to protect the invisible children of the streets. The film threatened to reignite public discourse around those massive institutional failures 20 years later.
It's staggering to think about. Over 20 years later, the government is still trying to suppress this narrative. Are they still afraid of the ghost of Javed Iqbal? Or are they afraid of what his ability to operate freely for so long says about them?
The censorship heavily suggests that they are deeply afraid of the latter. They want the narrative buried with him. However, in the age of global media, the ban spectacularly backfired in the court of public opinion.
Oh, big time.
The film, despite being banned domestically in Pakistan, was selected for screening at the prestigious Berlin International Film Festival, which gave the film massive international legitimacy and press coverage.
And back home in Pakistan, there was a massive cultural backlash against the censorship board. Major celebrities, highly influential people like Iqra Aziz and Osman Khalid Butt, publicly protested the ban. They took to social media and the press, arguing that you cannot just erase a traumatic piece of history simply because it makes the authorities look bad.
They demanded to see it.
The public pressure mounted over the next year, and finally the government caved. The ban was lifted, the filmmakers shortened the title to just Kukri, made some minor revisions to appease the board, and it was officially released in cinemas in June 2023. And it proved so culturally resonant that they're now planning a sequel for streaming platforms to delve even deeper into the psychology of the case.
The eventual release of the film signifies a really important cultural pushback against state-sanctioned amnesia. It shows a public demand to confront the darkest chapters of their own history. It proves that people want to look at this not just as an exploitational true crime spectacle, but as a necessary step in acknowledging the deep societal flaws that allowed such a predator to thrive in the first place.
It's a fascinating dark evolution of a story. From a killer demanding the spotlight in 1999, to a government desperately trying to turn that spotlight off in 2022, to the public demanding it be turned back on in 2023. It shows how the battle over who controls the narrative, who gets to write history, doesn't just end when the killer dies in a prison cell.
History isn't easily buried.
No, it isn't. We've covered so much incredibly heavy ground today. We started with the sheer logistical horror of a journalist jumping a wall to find 85 pairs of empty children's shoes and barrels of acid. We traced the complex psychology of a wealthy, aggressive man who weaponized his own economy and then turned a severe state punishment into a twisted mathematical justification for mass murder.
An unbelievable journey.
We looked at a judge who tried to fight absolute barbarism with medieval state-sanctioned retaliation. We explored the locked room mystery of a highly convenient, politically advantageous prison death. And we saw how, decades later, the fight over a movie proved that the scars of this case are still wide open.
It is a profound case study in extreme narcissism, catastrophic systemic failure, and the long, complicated shadow that unresolved trauma casts over an entire culture.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We talked at the very beginning about the silence of missing children being swallowed by the noise of the city. Consider this. Javed Iqbal hunted and killed 100 vulnerable, impoverished boys over the course of nearly 6 months. He dragged industrial barrels of acid into a residential neighborhood.
It's hard to even picture.
If he hadn't let his own narcissism take over, if his ego hadn't demanded that he mail that 32-page diary to the newspaper, demanding to be recognized for his dark achievements, would anyone have ever connected the dots? Would anyone have ever come looking for those specific kids?
It's a haunting question.
What does it say about the structure of our world, about who we value and who we ignore, when 100 children can vanish into the sewers and the only person who notices is their killer?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. We appreciate your time, your curiosity, and your willingness to look closely into the shadows with us to understand the why behind the what. Until next time.